So looking at these topics, and maybe if you've flipped through your book, you might go project management, dry. So we're going to keep it as interesting as we possibly can, okay? It engages every one of you in this room in some way, shape, or form, okay? We're going to go back to some of the items that we discussed this morning in terms of leadership. Communication will also be another hot topic, so we'll talk about that a little bit more. So one of the best ways to think about good project management, and again, I'll show the slide in a little bit here. I always think of it as a well-oiled bike chain, okay? You know, if you riding a bike and your bike chain is oiled and good repair, you're efficient, right? You move along pretty well. And then what happens when that bike chain starts to break down a little bit? It gets a little rusty, maybe get some twigs caught in it. Okay, you slow down. The efficiency starts to go away. It's harder, and then till literally almost your wheels fall off. Okay, so good project management, you need to be a team to do it, which means that you all need to buy into your piece of it, okay? So if we look at just definition of a project, it's a temporary endeavor, okay, to create a unique product, service, or result. Renovation, absolutely, project. Project management, okay, can be defined as the application of the knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to oversee the project itself, okay? Some advantages of using formal project management procedures, and I've seen some of the processes within the company, so I know that a lot of these things are in place, or a lot of these things are planned to be in place, so now it just comes down to the function of actually utilizing them, okay? You definitely have better control of financial, physical resources, human resources on the project, okay? Improved customer relations, shorter development times, lower costs, higher quality, okay? Increased reliability, higher profit margins, which is always a nice thing. Improved productivity, better internal coordination, and higher worker morale, okay? It's like a well-oiled bike chain. So the thing with it as well, and we'll look at a chart that I know is in your workbooks as well, you will see that it's sort of a flow of information. And as soon as you start skipping some of those steps, it's going to make things difficult. All right? Maybe not for you, but for somebody in the project team. Okay? And as soon as that starts to happen, the project is going to start to fail. Okay? It's inevitable. Will it fail completely? Maybe not. All right? Depends on when those missing steps get caught. Okay? If they get caught, all right? Makes a difference. So the processes are designed to work in sequence, so leaving a process or knowledge area unacknowledged is absolutely going to cause distress or complete failure. So this is in your workbook as well, and this comes from the Project Management Institute. Okay, it is the chart, basically, in which they use for the flow of projects. So essentially how these items work is that we're going to start in our upper left-hand corner, which is project integration and the initiating process group, starting with the development of a charter. We will talk more about what that is. But essentially how this works is once you develop a charter and figure out who your stakeholders are, you go into the planning mode. Okay? And once you're in planning, it's a flow. You're going to have information come in from your project charter. That's an input. You're going to use your knowledge, your skills, your tools to apply the knowledge to that information, and that's going to give you an output which flows as an input into your next category. So now you see why it's such a flow Like I said, it's a bike chain. So as soon as somebody decides to skip one of those steps, you got an issue, okay? So in project management, we have our process groups, okay? Initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling the project, and then close out. Now, execution and monitoring and controlling, they run hand in hand, okay? As you're performing the project, you have certain structures in place that are going to monitor and control the work. That's how you know that it's succeeding or not, okay? Our knowledge areas come down to integration, okay? Scope, schedule, cost, quality, okay? Resources, communications, risk, which is a huge one, procurement or purchasing, and then of course our stakeholders. A quick look at this, and this is usually a technique or something that I will do if I go into work with a new company. I will say, use this as your checklist. Go through and put a check mark beside everything you're doing. They'll do that. Not everything is checked, not ever. Something won't be checked. And then I'll say, okay, tell me about your problems. Where's your issues? 99.9% of the time, it's an unchecked box. It's something they're not doing, and that's causing them a problem. Makes sense, okay? So in these groups, the initiating one is basically acknowledging the existence of a new project, okay? Planning, we know what planning is all about, okay? Efforts to confirm your scope, budget, and schedule, and plan your execution. Execution, of course, involves coordination and management of all your resources to successfully complete your project. Monitoring and controlling measures progress towards reaching the successful outcome. And then, of course, closeout is bringing everything to an orderly end. Okay? This is the plan. Okay? Not everything is ever going to go according to plan. We know that. Okay? But what this kind of structure does is it gives you a place to come back to when something goes wrong. Right? If you don't ever kind of have this skeleton structure, when something starts to go wrong, you're just going to keep falling because you got no basis of anything catching you. You don't know where you were ever supposed to be. Right? So if you follow some kind of a structure when it comes to planning and executing your projects, now if something goes wrong, at least there's a place that's going to stop, and now you can make corrections and move forward again. Okay? This is just a snapshot of what they would typically show as a level of what they call effort when it comes to project management. So you can see the initiating process group has a high blip at the front and then a high blip at the end. Startup, closeout. Planning is fairly consistent throughout, okay? Obviously heavy on the front end, okay? Your execution, again, slow at the startup, high peak, levels off at the end. Your monitoring and controlling, that's a steady eddy. That's one that starts right at the beginning. You're starting to monitor and control everything as you start your planning phase. Okay, and then of course, your closeout process group, a little bit at the end. Okay, so no matter what your role is, you're going to be involved in some way, shape, or form in all of these. So it just kind of shows where your main effort is. Okay? Enterprise environmental factors in construction is absolutely something that we have to take into consideration. It's outside forces that we do not have any control over that can affect the projects. Licensing, permitting, right? Those are all things that are out there that are happening. New legislation, right? You can't do anything about them, but it's stuff that you have to take into consideration. Organizational process assets. You are an organizational process asset. right? Your knowledge, your skill, your ability, that's an asset to the overall organization. Okay? What else would you guys consider an organizational asset? If you are, what else would be?
Tools you use.
Tools you use. Suppliers? Absolutely. Right? They're all adding something positive, mostly, to your project. Okay? Lesson learned report. Why do we think that would be so important? What's a lesson learned report? For next time. Yeah. What was good? What worked? What didn't? Right? Something to learn from, to take into your next project to work off of. Right? And the thing with a lesson learned report is that it's not just about your project and your team. That's information that should become, organizational information. Hey, we did this on this project and it didn't work and it made a mistake, et cetera, et cetera. We're sharing this so that it doesn't happen to you. Okay? Very important piece. And it starts at the beginning. It starts in planning. Right? You're not going to wait until you get to the end of the project to go, oh yeah, remember that, whatever it was, 9 months ago, 10 months ago, we had that issue? Okay? Make sure that you're coming back and looking at it and documenting it straight away. All right, so that's just a very quick look at the structure, okay, of project management setup. Now we're going to look at different styles. And when I say styles, I don't mean the style of the project manager. I mean the style as to how the project itself is most efficiently going to be managed. Okay? So in project management, initially it was traditional, predictive, waterfall style project management. Now the problem with this, though, is to effectively run projects like this, you need so much detail up front. So much detail. And in renovations alone, you can only get so much detail because you have no idea the can of worms that you're opening up. Right? So it's hard to predict. It's hard to know and to say exactly, this is how we're going to proceed, this is how much it's going to cost, these are the materials we're going to need, when sometimes you just don't know those things. So what Agile project management does is looks at the project more from an incremental format, which, given the process chart that Graham gave me for your company, that is how you manage your projects. You go through different phases before you get to the actual execution phase, right? Your feasibility, design, execution, construction, and close. So it sounds, again, from the information that I've been given, it sounds very much like most of your projects are run off of that basis, right? You build. As you get new information, you build the project, okay? Hybrid, just like it says, it's a mix between the two. Because you might go into projects knowing certain pieces of information, right? Maybe those are things that you can fix in terms of costs or schedule, or know that this subcontractor is going to need to be involved, or this equipment is going to be required. You can fix that. You know that. So that now you're kind of looking at it from this hybrid approach. Okay? Style option is basically based off of what information do you have in your planning phase, okay? And what does the process with your client look like? Now again, in traditional, it was very much a meet with the client up front, gather all the knowledge, get all the information that you can from your client. Basically say, okay, you go over there, and we'll phone you when it's done. I know that that's extreme and it doesn't happen that way, but that's sort of how it is, right? It's saying, okay, you've given us everything we need. If we have questions, we'll let you know. Okay? Predictive, traditional project management is not a fan of change at all. Okay? So we'll just let you know when your project is done and present it to you. That's traditional. Whereas hybrid or, agile, thank you. Agile or hybrid is very much collaborative with your clients. You're continually back and forth. Making, like, change is basically how your project is run, is by collaborating with your client, getting new information, executing that, etc. And through a feasibility and then going into design, and again, you guys can absolutely tell me if I'm incorrect here, by the time you go to actually execute the project, the information you have, for the most part, is probably quite solid because you've had all of this interaction with your client. Now again, absolutely, I know in residential renovations specifically, sometimes you just don't know until you know, right? And that can change things, absolutely, right? Which is why a hybrid or agile style is probably best for renovation, okay? Predictive, not a big fan of change, while both agile and hybrid invite that and collaborate with the client through the execution. It's very flexible. Agile is, in a way, almost more about the why of the project than the how. Okay, knowing from your clients up front and center, why is it that they're doing this? Okay, is it a young family? Is it a growing family? They need more bedrooms, they need more space. Is it just an old house they want to renovate? What's the why? Okay, knowing those things can also help you plan, design, and execute. Okay? So some elements of each one here. Predictive, you have a clear vision, complete information. It's a very top-down approach. Start up here, finish down here. It's very systematic. Change is a constraint, not a fan. Agile, scope elements are unclear to start with. Okay, it doesn't remain that way, but to start with, your scope elements are unclear. You are continuously collaborating, okay, with clients, with consultants, okay, your project team. Client is making choices along the way. It's flexible. You're getting consistent feedback. It's very customer-centric. So if we were to look at all of these, and of course hybrid is a blend of both, what style do you think mostly suits what you guys do? Hybrid?
I think all three,
In
my experience.
Okay, in given situations.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Depends on the project. Absolutely. Right? Some of them might, you might get clients coming to you that have a lot, they know what they want. Right? Others might need a little help along the way. Right? But adapting or figuring out what your approach is at the beginning can be helpful because now you know what that approach looks like throughout the execution of the project. Do you think this can change halfway through, partway through? Sure can. Yeah, absolutely it can. Probably a lot of it is dependent on your client. Well, I shouldn't say that. Dependent on your client to a degree until things like COVID happen, when lumber is 10 times as much and you can't get a fridge and stove for a year and a half, and et cetera, right? So there's always that to consider, which hopefully we don't have to do again. But there are supply chain issues, there are subcontractor, financial, yeah, right? So just because you adapt a certain methodology going into it doesn't necessarily mean that that's how it's going to stick throughout the duration. But sometimes knowing that you're kind of shifting your style and how you're approaching the project pardon me, can be very helpful. Okay, so just being aware that there's different ways to attack it. Okay. Typically as well with Agile and hybrid, instead of looking way over here, which is what traditional does at the end, this is the goal, this is the objective. Agile or hybrid will look at it to go, we're just going to do a little sprint. Okay, it's not a long distance here. We're just going to go for a fast little sprint. This is the goal and the objective of this sprint. So the way you're phased, your feasibility, it's a sprint. Okay, you're getting to the bottom of that goal in your feasibility phase so that you can move into your next phase, right? So it's quick moving information. You have a very clear objective, but it's not the overall end goal. Okay? Lots of times these sprints will get broken down even further into what we call time boxing. Okay, so if you are, and I know I'm not sure where it is, I know it's somewhere in the book, your phases, the way you do your projects. So if you were to look at, as an example, let's say your design phase, right? There's going to be very specific steps. And all of those steps would be what they would call time boxed, right? We're going to say, okay, here's all the steps that we have to do in our design phase or our feasibility phase, whichever. Okay? And how much time can we allot for those? What is our goal for those? Okay? Do we need a week? Do we need 10 days? What is our timing on them? You set these short time boxed goals to meet your sprints, which basically overall will meet the objective. So again, it's sort of like this morning when we were talking, or earlier this morning when we were talking about all that stuff that's going on in your brain and all of that stuff. It's about taking little bites of it instead of trying to make sense of everything at once, right? Breaking it down. Doesn't matter what your style is, baseline information. You will be so sick of this word by the end of today because baseline is so important in project management. Without baseline, you have no measuring stick. Okay? Now I know going into projects you might be like, well, I don't have all the information. Okay, how do I create a scope baseline or a budget baseline or a schedule baseline? Typically it's those 3 items, right? At some point, you have to draw a line in the sand and say, this is our baseline. This scope is going to be performed for this budget according to this schedule. Line in the sand, anything that comes after that is a change. And that's how you monitor and control the work. Okay? Again, if you don't ever establish the baseline of knowing where you're starting from, what are you going to report against? Well, I don't know. It's cost us $275,000. What was the budget? Well, I don't know. Are you over budget? I don't know. Right? You got to establish something to be able to start from there. And an important thing too here is to be able to establish that baseline specifically with the budget. We'll go back to my scenario of, Laura, you haven't picked your flooring. When I was given that budget, did they leave flooring at 0? No. They knew I needed flooring. If they left that as 0 in my budget, well, how accurate is that budget? Not 2. So what they told me was, okay, well, you've told us, you've given us an idea of what you want. You just haven't actually made the selection. But you're thinking of laminated hardwood or whatever. So we know that there is 1,400 square feet. Based on your other specifications, we've chosen this spec. We're saying if you stick with what you think you're going to do at this measurement, at this square foot value, your flooring is going to cost you somewhere in the neighborhood of $24,000. Okay. Is that the actual number? Is that a quote from a supplier or an installer? No. but it's based off of something. It's an allowance, right? So these are the pieces that have to be a part of your baseline budget, right, to make your budget accurate in comparison to the scope of work. I think one of the biggest things, and I will talk more about cost allowances a little bit later, one of the biggest and most important things, and maybe you guys can reflect on this, is that if you use a cost allowance in your budget and present that to your client, you have to be so clear. This is an allowance. You don't know what you want yet. So I'm not going to give you bottom of the bin grade carpet pricing. This is what I'm basing this pricing off of, and this number in your budget will change. It's going to change. Once you decide what you want, unless miraculously I'm just absolutely right on the money, which is probably not likely, this number is going to change. It's either going to go up or it's going to go down based on your choice. That's one of the hardest things I find with cost allowances is the explanation to the client and getting them to understand that it is going to change. Okay? Just something to be aware of. Project management style is a development approach, again, which fits with your company. You build. You create information in your feasibility. You create structure. And then your next phase, design, builds on top of that feasibility. And then the same thing. Your construction builds on top of your design, eventually getting to the end of the project. Okay. This is in your workbook as well. I'm not going to go into the details here, but essentially just what it is going to tell you is just the difference between predictive and agile and iterative and incremental. Now I would put typically, and I know all your projects can vary, but typically it kind of sounded more agile hybrid. And to me, you're incremental, right? So it's got requirements, you can elaborate on that, right? It's not going to fit so much into the predictive category. Again, knowing and understanding the differences between these, pardon me, also kind of gives you your approach to your project. Okay? Key factors. Okay, we are in, I'm going to say about 15 to 20 minutes.